Okay, welcome to the Legislative Review Committee. Today is Thursday, March 6th. It's 1 o'clock and we're in City Hall Conference Room 301. We're going to start with an approval of the minutes. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great, thank you. And we will move on. I do want to report that I did hear from both Commissioner Culpepper and not be able to be here today. So we don't have any public here, so I'm sure there's no public input unless there's an invisible public. And we're going to go on to the first commission identified item of interest. And I'm going to turn this over to our county manager here to kind of give us an overview of this. And we have various staff members here who will be speaking with us as well.
All right. Very good, thank you. Got one item, this is a new item sent to us, and me in reading the initial charge with this, I really felt like it was kind of important just to come as part of this kickoff meeting and just have a discussion. It seems to be kind of in some ways a broad topic, in some ways kind of not. And what it says specifically is review the existing noise ordinance and to discuss prospective updates, particularly in the AR zone related to non-agricultural sounds, as well as in the commercial downtown district relative to amplified noise. And then goes on to say the committee may wish to seek a different measure of noise using objective measures of volume, for example. So I've asked Harrison Daniel, Doug Hansford, and Bruce Lonnie to all be here. These are our experts in all things code related and noise related and zoning related. And we really did not want to come in this morning with, a presentation up on the screen, and Jack Reddick is with us with code enforcement too on the screen, and kind of say, here's what we think, and we want you to consider this. I'd rather hear from y'all this morning. You're the ones that hear from the constituents. We are assuming, based on this charge, that a lot of what is driving the non-agricultural in the AR zone is our fairground out on the east side, but don't know, you all may get complaints. Mr. Johnson, you've got AR property in your district. Certainly you may get complaints other than just a single old non-conforming use that's out there. And then with downtown, I'd like to hear what your interests are, where you would like to go. I know Harrison can speak to if you want him to, there may be some things that can help our police department with noise ordinances that they experience on a regular basis. There may be some things that, from my experience, what I've, been working in planning, that they sound like a good idea. One of them that jumps right off the page to me is, well, let's just plug in a specific decibel level and use instruments in our noise ordinance. Makes a ton of sense, but you kind of just setting up, making it much more difficult in the courtroom to take one of these through, because if you're going to use it, then there's a whole list of standards that have got to be demonstrated to the judge that have been followed and regularly inspected. And Harrison can talk more to that if that's something you're interested in, but just kind of wanted to open it up for y'all's questions and see what your interest level is. And then we'll go back, put some stuff together and bring it back to you.
And I'm going to move it to our fellow commissioners to say whatever they want to say on this, and then we can hear from staff just to start us off about concerns.
Right, I feel like we were just here on the noise ordinance, but we were covering it in a different, more landscape version.
Lower.
Yes. I can say that I don't have any AR, but I know that Patrick, he gets complaints because of the fairgrounds. And so I'm not sure if we need to understand what it is now out there, like you were saying, non-conforming, as if something new came out, it would be different to understand that. But the downtown stuff, for me, it's amplified devices on our public right of way, on the on the streets, sorry, sidewalk streets. So, I mean, I get it that there's a venue. I remember Bill Berryman saying, Allison, the music's playing, the venue, the doors open, the noise rolls out. I said, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people with amplified devices. If you wanna, if we wanna, if I wanna play my guitar and have a thing out there and get change,
Mhm.
but I don't need to have a speaker system. So in my mind, I would like it to look into if it's feasible to not allow amplified devices on our sidewalks or street. I think it also speaks to if it, bullhorn. At one time we talked, was it feasible to say you can't be downtown with a bullhorn unless you have a special use permit? You know, you're starting the race off or you're, something festival bring it. But, not knowing where this came from, as soon as I saw that, that's what I was hoping that we could learn more about and see if there's, we can't do anything about what somebody's saying, but I don't think that we necessarily need to let it.
I didn't, our attorney's office is always here for you guys, but did not recognize.
Yeah,
it.
well, A lot of the.
That whole end of the
attorneys'
case. So,
And Commissioner Johnson?
I've not heard much about noise in my district in my short term so far, except for just neighbors that live in close proximity of each other that they worked out themselves. Outside of that, I don't know of any in District 6 yet that are a reoccurring problem.
Yeah.
Or concern.
Thank you. And the only thing I have from my side of town is really through, through Patrick and at the fairgrounds. And I'd be very interested to hear what code enforcement and police department have heard from residents who have reached out that way. There was some amplification of music, which is gonna be solved because we have this new Kroger's. People, some church organization was, amplifying music when they were doing their food distribution or some good cause thing, but they had very loud music early on a Saturday morning that I had, but that's gone because that situation is gone. So, but it was the amplified music there. But anyway, that's all I have. I'd really like to hear from staff about these two things and maybe starting with the fairground, because I think that was the first one here, and then the downtown amplification.
you want to give a little history on the fairground? I know you don't want to, but can you?
So the fairground is an inherited situation, for lack of a better way to put it. It was in more regular operation before unification, as an event space, and it was born under very little regulation under the Clarke County set of ordinances. So after unification, this kind of rolled over into the new administration of how we're going to do zoning as a unified government. And it's been condoned, I guess is a way to say it, to allow to continue. It is legal in that sense. It is non-conforming in many senses. We have a lot of discussion lately about legal and non-conformity. This is probably the poster child for legal non-conforming use. We work cooperatively whenever there's an event out there. Planning usually takes in the first point of contact, permitting. Then we work with health department if there's any food service. We work with building inspection on any kind of code related things, fire marshal, sheriff department and or police department for traffic management, TPW for traffic management. But whenever those events come through, they are treated as special events and permitted as such. Regulations of 4 per year have been involved and discussed, but that's been when it's been a major event. So that's over 1,000 people, which is difficult to pin down. We've had rodeos out there that we're pretty sure have reached that level, but we've had other events that are well beneath it. And so they haven't pushed into that 4 per year threshold. There's really nothing in place for us on the front end to discuss sound. And oftentimes, just practical issue, we're talking to these people within 12 hours of them wanting to start operations. We're not within days or weeks in advance. It's usually the stuff's showing up out there and they're starting to set up, and then code enforcement goes out and says, you need to go talk to planning. And then we go through this very quick 2-minute drill to get them permitted if we can. And that is a repeat occurrence whenever there's an event.
I think what sets the fairground apart from what our ordinance, y'all crafted language several years ago for what we call, I think they're called temporary special event permits. And it was geared towards, if somebody's got a farm out in the AR zone and once a year they want to have a big barbecue to raise money for somebody, and they're not permitted to do that, but they can do that. I think it's twice a year, 3 times a year. They don't have to provide the paid parking. They've got to provide parking area. They can have music, but it can't be amplified if it's within a certain distance of residentially zoned property. And with fairground, it's a little bit different because it's kind of been there. But the other part of it from a zoning perspective is, a lot of even when we get into our noise ordinance, it's determined by proximity to residential property. I think our attorney's office or Harrison could certainly speak more to that, but what we've got going on out there are concerts that are extremely loud, and there are people that live out there, but they're not, is it RS specifically?
The areas AR, pretty much everything's either AR or government zoning up to about a mile distance from there, and then there's a little bit of RS about a mile away.
But we don't pick up AR in the noise ordinance.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's, even though it's agricultural residential, it's not the same as the way our ordinance identifies proximity to RS single family zone properties, so.
Right, so the distance that exists in any of these special event or temporary special event, it's specific to a residential distance, not the house on the farm next door.
Not specific to the house.
It's RS.
I mean, it's
zoning
the
designation.
zoning, right, so there are people living, but it's not, they're living in the AR. And that would not be a feasible change, that's just us learning how it is.
Yeah, could you tell me who owns the fairground, who runs the fairground?
I don't remember his name.
I mean, it's privately owned.
Privately.
It's privately owned. Was it previously publicly owned? But it's been a fairground. It was a fairground prior to unification. And so kind of got, legal non-conformity continuing in this.
Yeah, I don't
Wait.
know when the use was established. I mean, gosh, it wouldn't go back to the 70s.
Okay.
60s.
But it's a privately owned and, okay.
So the property tax or the key public, says it's owned by the estate of a Melinda Drew Carr.
The state of,
Estate of, correct.
that kind of speaks to longevity.
Yeah. Do you have any information to share on complaints from the police or the code enforcement?
I think most of them probably go to PD because it's typically after hours.
Right.
We'll usually hear about it the next day or the
Mhm.
Monday after. But there's some.
So we do receive complaints out there. Sometimes we get complaints that night from people in the area. Sometimes it's a delayed complaint. People will directly call Commissioner Davenport and then he will send us a follow-up on it. So we get complaints in those two different ways. But yes, we do get complaints out there when they have either rodeos or concerts where they're producing amplified sound. They have bands and they have stage.
Do you know what time the complaints come in? I mean, the noise goes to, sorry, no.
I don't know, I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I don't have that in front of me exactly. We can certainly look at the exact times they come in,
Yeah.
but generally they're gonna be evening to nighttime hours.
I guess I was like, when do they finish, because don't we have noise ordinances that are connected to time, so, I mean, Patrick called me recently and said, get out there. Go down to Morton Road and listen, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't 11 o'clock night, because I actually went out and, yeah, I wouldn't have gone out at 11. So, I'm just curious what the time frame is as well. Commissioner Johnson?
I wanted to know how many complaints on average are received per year for this particular property? The fairgrounds,
Mhm.
like how many are on average are doing or received?
We can pull that together for you.
Okay, and if it's amplified sound, just anything plugged into a speaker in general, like period? Is that what amplified sound?
Amplified for purposes of the other type of events that that are permitted would be anything that is plugged into a speaker. I think the current noise ordinance is just audible from a certain distance.
It's level 300 feet.
It sets it 300 feet or 100 feet, depending on the time of day and the day of the week.
And if I can chime in on that, Austin, feel free to, but what the ordinance speaks about is mechanical sound making devices. So that also is like cars, that's TV, you know, it's not just someone sets up a speaker.
I mean, for other noise ordinances that we have.
No, that's our.
No, that's what I mean, other, right, but that don't apply to these specific areas. In general, we refer to,
Yeah, it's, the ordinance refers as mechanical sound making devices.
Has there ever been any contact with with the estate, someone from the estate to have a discussion about complaints on that? It's hard to say if they're ongoing or if they're problematic, if they're not often that, you know, per year. But I was just curious, has there ever been any conversation with there's anyone related to the estate?
Not that I'm aware after the fact, not that I'm aware of. These tend to come, they're kind of seasonal. I don't.
Quiet during the cold weather. I would assume, I know that there's rodeo coming up.
You know, but I guess theoretically it could be, you know, we'd like to equate it to concerts in terms of what's
Yeah.
making the noise, but it could be, you know, a monster truck rally or
Yeah.
something that are extremely loud that would generate that type of noise too.
That's right.
I guess maybe the question is too, whether or not it's a state, but is there some, management company?
Yeah.
I mean, who is the management company? Is there, right?
Something like, yeah,
Yeah.
like maybe having a conversation with them about the, you know, policy, not that we have one specific to this property yet, but maybe having a discussion with them about complaints. They might need, you know, the government in the middle, if they knew that there were complaints.
Look at that. I don't think there has been at this point, and really the only, when I was there still, I mean, we're dealing with the guy that is, he's the owner, he represents himself as the owner of the, or the promoter of.
Yeah.
Yeah, promoter.
So he owns the equipment that gets set up, and he has a more than passing relationship with property owners. Whether he has a connection to the estate or is just friendly, but it's been an ongoing business relationship for a long, long
For a long time.
When we studied this before, we ended up with a chart and, you know, like Taylor Grady was one of the tall bar on how many, as far as them, a lot of people had thought that there would be a lot of Greek houses and there weren't. And it was so, that was within the areas where it's enforceable. And I thought that what we're saying is out in the AR, there isn't something
Uh-huh.
that is enforceable. So it's the property owner is not allowing something that we don't allow.
Right,
So that would be, I think, why the conversation's not happening, because there's nothing being violated except people sleep,
right.
apparently.
And that's why we hesitate, as code enforcement, we hesitate to contact somebody, to tell them, hey, we're getting complaints on you when there's not an ordinance violation.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I don't want them to think, you know, although there's not an ordinance violation, code enforcement is still gonna come down on you because we're getting complaints.
Yeah,
It's a little bit touchy. I would almost want to
Uh-huh.
coordinate with the manager's office to have that discussion with the property owner.
yeah, that makes sense. And also, we don't want we want to make sure if something happens out there that needs police presence, that it's there for something that is safety oriented
Right.
versus don't call them I don't know what, but I think I'm not sure how much we would be able to change with it. Part of it's going to be understanding what we can't do.
Yeah,
So we're talking about the fairground, if I may just make a
Yeah.
quick point.
Please.
There is an exception under the noise ordinance for noises and sounds that are caused by manufacturing, governmental or commercial entities in the normal course of their business. I think it's pretty much undisputed that the fairgrounds is a commercial entity that's in the business of having these large events that obviously produce sound. And so typically, the noise ordinance would not apply to commercial entities in the normal course of their business, except for the limitations that we discussed earlier, if the commercial entity is located within a certain distance from a single family residential zone.
Right. And that came under our discussions of lawn care services. Too early in the morning with their noise, anything mechanical equipment. So seems to me the fairgrounds is similar to that, where we also learn there was nothing we could do.
Commissioner Johnson, did you have a question?
I was just
Comment?
gonna ask, Deputy Chief, if there were calls in the past when the police had to go out there, when they went, what was the exchange, communication exchange? What was it for and how did they resolve? Was there anything resolved?
So I don't know if I can speak specifically to an individual incident, but yes, we've gone out there. I know we've had communication with the event organizers
Okay.
on the day of or when the events are happening. But ultimately, it's not enforceable. So the best we can do is just inform people that you're bothering people in the area with the noise,
Mhm.
and that's about all we were able to do.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that when we met internally before in preparation for this, we had talked about as a possibility. Because I think right now the noise ordinance is specific to RS, single family zones.
Mhm.
If you were to expand that to allow it to be in residential zone, which would pick up agricultural residential as well as multifamily residential, I think I would hesitate from a staff standpoint to go any further than that. Because, we have for years, and then we've modified it to special use permit, but we allow residential construction under one of those scenarios in our commercial zones too. But to introduce that use and then in a way that negatively impacts existing uses that are there legally in zones intended for them to be there, and because now we've introduced residential, they're held to a higher standard because there's a house 2 lots over first, even though that house may be in the commercial zone too. So I don't think I'd have a real big comfort level from a staff position of going outside of residential zones, but that may be something, if you have an interest in it, that we could at least go back and do a little more work on that I don't want to do something that creates a lot of impacts that were
Unintended, right. I'd be interested in seeing if there were any suggestions that you all thought that could be, considered for the fairgrounds from the legal and the enforcement. And without too many unintended, I mean, maybe you come back and say, actually, we don't see anything. But, I would be interested in knowing the number of complaints as well.
And I just was talking with Jeff Montgomery too, and he said, this is our first time on this topic. I don't know, where it's going from, but he wanted to make sure that film productions also, that's another entity that's in our community that does things at different times than, a scene needs to be at night
Right.
and so on and so forth. But I haven't heard anything that would make that more complicated or with what they've done. But it's just another example of things in the community. But I think they go through a permitting thing to be in the places that they want to be too.
This may be question for our attorneys. It's just, I've just thought of it. And from a standpoint of what you just said, Austin, with noises that are generated as part of their normal operation of commercial use, does that carry a grandfather status with it too? If the ordinance were to be amended and now something that was not under it becomes under it, as long as they continue, are they not subject to the increased restrictions?
I think that's a very good question, and probably one that we're gonna have to do
Yeah.
some additional
Yeah.
research on. But I think one of the considerations would be if, are we discontinuing a certain use of the property versus just placing sort of a time, manner, place restriction on the emanation of noise from the property, right?
Right, and so if I'm thinking about our amphitheater.
Right, I was thinking, right.
You know, that would be an example, and I guess anything that we talk about, we need to understand what can happen or be enforced for a new entity versus, because we can't, that's why I didn't want to get into. I mean, we do have an example, but we also can't make something to pick on a
Right.
particular
Mhm.
thing.
And
I mean, we
that's
can use the
right.
situation as an example to talk about, but you can't craft something.
That's
But-
only applies to,
Mhm.
Well, or
Or-
interferes, like
or-
you say, you just shut down my business.
Right, right.
Because they can't do.
and that's the
that.
grandfather. And then the question of with the as you have, I mean, didn't something happen with the noise like over there on, where Trapeze is by the cement factory, where you're building residential close to, industrial, right? And I can't remember what came out of that, but you can't then say to the industry, or did we, like, oh, you can't make noise now because there's residential close by. You can't do that, right? Right.
That's
so-
why there's an exemption.
Mhm.
Yes, and obviously with the growth and increase of residential,
Yeah,
it's also, we would also have commercial also growth, such as the Athena filming studio. I mean, not everything might be within the studios. So,
Just, I mean, that's going to be in proximity to, certainly to AR. If we modified the criteria from RS to any kind of residential zones.
for new noisy commercial.
Yeah.
Or non-commercial. But even a wedding venue would be commercial, wouldn't it?
Mr. Johnson.
I guess I'm wondering if there's anything really to solve. On the record, I just want to make sure I understood something before I make my comment. I can't remember who said it, but regulations 4 per year has been the threshold. Is that like 4 events per year? I'm not sure. I was looking at
Large
this.
scale, and I,
Okay, so 4 events, is that what that means?
maybe two, I could be
Okay,
off. At one point it was 4, but,
okay, I was just
The
curious.
big ones versus.
Yeah.
But that is an ordinance.
major event entertainment is fine.
Okay.
And it does have that threshold, and I believe it's 1,000,
Mhm.
participants of 1,000 people or more.
Mhm.
That is what we were regulating.
I
Because
see, I
they're
see.
unique in that way with
Mhm.
traffic and sound and.
So the vendors and all that stuff.
But even that it's hard because the savvy, person.
The promoters want to make
Yes,
sure.
permit is gonna say that they're anticipating 700 people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's,
So, and that's what I was leading to, like, if we create a new ordinance, or there's a place for an ordinance, or refinement of an existing ordinance, if they meet the thresholds, whatever it is, and it's just, they know in advance what to do, they can still manipulate, anyone can still manipulate the information.
Mhm.
But it really matters to me how often this is. If this is 6 to 9 times a year, I would not think it was a crisis.
Mhm.
But if it was 2 to 3 times a month, I would definitely want us to revisit and spend some time to, deliberating on a solution. to help those neighborhoods out.
Okay, so I think from the AR issue, we'll see what we can find in terms of some complaint history on that, and then we'll bring you back something that shows you what it would look like if you wanted to consider changing the language from single family zones and expanding that a little bit. And then that'll give us some time to think about if there are ramifications from our police department or our attorney's office. If you consider doing this, here are some specifics that you need to consider. That'll give us a little time to pull that together, and we'll bring that back to you next month.
And that ordinance includes that time limit, right? The one that
Yeah,
applies to
we'll have
residential,
some
right?
stuff up, we can put
Okay.
up on the screen that
Okay,
kind of just high level bullet points. And then with the other thing I heard was the sidewalk noise and
The downtown stuff?
downtown stuff. I don't have a lot of experience with that one.
Yeah, it just has to do with, I mean, some examples are, just there's obviously noises that are gonna be coming from downtown venues. But it seems to me the right of way that we would be able to keep it quieter by not allowing amplification. And so that would be the megaphones, speakers, electronic, whatever your thing is there. The enforcement of it wouldn't have to have a decibel counter. It would just be a matter of, in my mind, just, hey, we don't allow that. You need to put that back in your car and go a cappella.
We can bring you back a thought out response to that one as well. So,
Yeah, and then,
Okay.
and I mean, I have people who complain about hearing the music in downtown venues, and it's just like, downtown has been there. You knew when you bought that house on Pulaski. And I get the construction that's happening. I was like, okay, just hang in there. It'll be over soon. But part of it is, people having a bad day and can't get their good night's sleep, and we hear about it. I don't know how. But also, it seems like the one with amplified devices on our sidewalks in the downtown district. I would also like it to not be a time frame. I mean, just not allowed night or day.
and I guess the question on that I would have for you is in, permitted demonstrations that are permitted downtown, versus like what's allowed on that one, that would be a different situation in there. I know that sometimes people have some rallies where they do it last minute and they might have a megaphone. So I guess, just how that all plays out, what's allowed if you have a permit. So to contrast that, just sort of.
Yeah, totally permitted.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. There's also an exception for noise, that comes from specially permitted events. Under that same section that talks about the commercial entities. And so the noise ordinance would not apply to noise coming from a special event.
So Adfest.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
We're not trying to hamper
right.
something that's permitted because it's going through and getting all that thing. I do have another question about your 1,000 participant threshold. What kicks in if they come and they're like, hey, we're gonna have 1,500 people here for sure. Does it kick in another batch of things that they have to provide, like security or police or fire or, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does change the discussion a little bit because we do anticipate greater traffic. We may have, especially if we have a very small site and they're saying that there's that number, we may have coordination with restroom facilities or setting up of tents requires special permitting. We may have things to talk about with the fire marshal that are unique depending on the space that number of people will be occupying. But typically, we had a couple of places that did this on the regular. And that number was put in there as a threshold, not because it was indexed against other codes, it was sort of a reasonableness number. And anything beyond that, we need to tell you, you can't do those monthly, to Commissioner Johnson's point, like this can't happen all the time. You need to find another venue.
Mhm.
And we had a handful of places that were sort of repeating that, and it wasn't managed well. So that was a threshold for us to be able to say no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that, again, was an example, not specific to the fairground, but it's an example that you've said that in defining that, they're not meeting that for
It
you.
wasn't the fairground that I was thinking of.
Yeah, yeah.
Fairgrounds, again, difficult just by the broad nature of what that could entail in terms of regular course of business versus the restaurant bar in town somewhere that, wants to have a weekend Saturday celebration that's going to spread out into the parking lot and the next door, and all of a sudden we've got 1,000 people they're anticipating and they're going to have bands outside all day. And I think we could argue that's not the regular course of business for a restaurant to do that. Then it becomes a special use potentially and it kicks in some other things, but.
Right. And then that example is by volume of participants. But again, it's a commercial, it's on their property, it's their amplified stage. That's where the commercial part of it is versus
Right.
the public right of way that
Sure.
should be enjoyed by everybody without.
To your question about downtown, we do have some spaces, most notably the park, that is going to be in place just right over there. It is intentionally designed for performance. It's having a stage built. So I hear what you're saying about the right of way and having some thou shalt, shall nots.
Yeah.
Do for the right of way. But for those places that are outside of the right of way, but that are semi-public or on publicly owned land, what were you anticipating for those?
When they be permitted
Maybe, I mean.
or
if
spontaneous,
you have a
you're saying that,
permit,
yeah,
Yeah, if somebody comes along and
impromptu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're not in the right of way.
Yeah.
We have businesses in downtown that have outdoor space that could be utilized for. Yeah, so it's not in that case, music permeating through the walls and coming out of the door when it's open, but they're physically set up outside, but not on public right of way.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to further.
No, and that's the kind of stuff, I guess, that.
If we do it here,
Yes, talk among yourself.
Yeah,
Come
yeah.
back and educate us, but I hear what you're saying, and it could be that we're anticipating having something in place for the park. Do we have a name for that? Hot Corner Mural Park at this point, and the same with College Square. I mean, these are places
Right.
where we anticipate things happening, but, it needs to not be a dueling amplified, which, same with the protests. If I have a permit to go from the arch to City Hall and marching with my megaphone, can somebody else also do it? It's like, well, we already have a permit for that day and that thing. It would just be one. I don't know if somebody could also come and say, we also want a permit and we're gonna.
Right.
I mean, we regularly have competing events, competing protests, so
Yeah.
that's a pretty common thing. And I think what everyone in the room probably knows, or at least should be aware of, is that what we're looking at is analysis of reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. And so we will certainly go back and provide you guys some guidance, but also just recognizing the critical importance of protecting First Amendment rights. And we want to make sure we're not considering certain types of speakers or certain types of speech differently than other speakers.
Exactly, and I guess that's where the mechanical device comes in,
That's exactly right.
with it. And if it's permitted due to a special use, but then again, understanding who's giving the permits out, making sure, I'm sorry, we already had one for that day, but if we let 3 a day already, those are the kind of things that I think, need to touch on to make sure that we're not setting up an unintentional, misinterpretation. Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
The bells are okay.
I would be less inclined to eliminate, downtown amplified sound. I'm less inclined to eliminate it altogether. I think there's a place for it. I mean, I've traveled a 100 cities, and there is a place where I would be more interested in maybe the decibel, maybe just not encroaching on someone else's quality of life or the business. Like if someone is standing on the sidewalk in front of a business, it should not come inside, that sound should not come inside the business if the door is closed. I would be more supportive of that versus eliminating downtown amplification altogether. I think, there's a place for different types of performers, like you have speakers, you have people who play music, you have different things, so.
Do our street, like performers, what's this, if I wanna come down tonight with my guitar,
Please let us know what time you're gonna start here.
guitar and play something, and I have a little speaker there, do I have to have a permit? Will someone come and tell me? Well, I mean, not me in particular, basically, right, but, anyone, but what happens? Cause you do see people in the city, in cities that have a small
They have
amplification system.
small, and those are.
So
fine.
is there, do we have any rules or regulations on that, or do we allow people to do that without? Do I have to have a permit?
I mean, there were small ones.
Or have we not discussed that? Well, I'm even talking about getting out on the road and like just playing my guitar. Like, do we have any rules on that?
I don't believe that you do.
We don't.
And
Okay.
that's fundamentally because of the First Amendment, right? So streets and sidewalks are traditional public forums.
Mhm.
So people have the right to say what they wish in those forums. Now, obviously, the streets, you can't just go stand in the middle of the street unless you have a permit to close the street. But certainly sidewalks are pretty much fair game for most kinds of expressive conduct.
And even if you're putting out a hat to collect money? But if you,
So I think sales, street sales, there are some rules for
okay,
that.
so if I'm coming down and my bead, like, bracelets I'm
hot dog
sending, then,
vendor.
yeah, that's different than when if I'm going down with my guitar.
That's right.
So there's licensing. I don't know if we need to get an update if that's relevant because we have a finite number of license for the hot dog vendor. And I'm putting my jewelry table, and it's my understanding there's a lot of rules on
On that.
them and they're limited. There's a certain number of them and I think they're precious. The people who have them
Yeah,
follow the rules from my understanding to not violate and lose that. But that's a business. Again, that's a commercial entity.
Central Services can speak to that better because they handle those, but that is, there is a whole ordinance called street sales for that purpose. But just essentially busking, I would think would be protected by the First Amendment.
And to be more specific, like what I'm describing, I could be more specific. Like in Santa Monica, I've gone travel there a lot of times, and people come out, and that's how people get discovered, so to speak. So you see a different person every block, but you don't hear that as you go to the next block, you don't hear the person you just passed. So something small enough to where they can gather, a small crowd can gather if they like what they hear, but it's not disturbing the business behind them, nor the next person that wants to showcase their whatever talent they have. So that.
Maybe you could find out for us their ordinance
I
details.
think they have something specific.
Savannah has specifics in their areas so that you can.
So it's not like a big sound.
Yeah, there's only one marsh grass weaving person, and they actually, Carol, you have to audition for Savannah to get your spot.
I'm gonna have to
Play your guitar.
Well,
and
you're
sing.
gonna have to wait a long
But,
time.
It's actually like that. And then I think they have a lanyard. So like if you started cussing at me
Yeah,
for not putting the quarter in your hat,
I could be,
then I would be able to take your picture and say, this is the one that did this. But anyway, that's, I don't know if we have to get into that for the amplified discussion, but if we do.
but in terms of the amplified discussion, considering we have this little park and College Square coming, that's a difference. Those, if you brought up, those are things to consider there, right?
Where does this bleed, or does it bleed over into panhandling? One person's performance is another person's, puppy.
And
That is not distinguished, is it?
I would say right now, because we don't, to my knowledge, and of course I always be wrong, but I don't think we have any kind of ordinance related to buskers. I would say that they're both operating as people who are speaking. Panhandling is speech. It is protected by the Supreme Court of the United States, as First Amendment protected speech. So, I would say that I haven't looked at, like, for instance, I think Asheville and maybe you mentioned Savannah, I haven't looked at their ordinances. I could speak to them as to whether there's a point when someone is performing that they can potentially get a license, but I would say that that is never going to be treated the same as panhandling. At least not based on the current law that I've read.
Sherry, can you tell us, like, in some communities, they don't have panhandling in certain areas? And they have posted signs. How are they able to get around that, free speech criteria?
Sure. So, I mean, we certainly prepared a number of confidential memos on this that we can share, but I think what I would say publicly is that there's a good chance that a lot of ordinances like that you see are not actually legal and just haven't been challenged. I will say that there is one case I'm aware of that upheld the designation of a specific zone as sort of a no panhandling zone based on the special nature of the area. In this case, I believe it was a US District Court in Florida, and it was a beach. And the court looked at sort of this very unique situation of people who were, let's be honest, in, states of undress, right? Leaving their items on a beach that is just a bit of a more vulnerable place than certain places. There might be an argument that you could establish a downtown or a certain very centralized location as having a similar position, although I think you'd see an argument that you're not vulnerable in just a downtown public space in the same way that maybe you are lying on a beach. In either case, there's that one little argument that I know that exists. But generally speaking, the idea is that panhandling is speech, and saying we're not gonna allow you to beg for money is in fact discrimination based on someone's speech and is a violation of the First Amendment.
Right. And they can have signs, but they can't be the billboard type. I mean, right, we don't allow signs on the sidewalk, which is why they're held. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's free speech.
I've not looked at that recently, but it's sort of similar to, people might want to keep abortion activists from having signs showing aborted fetuses or other images or speech that may be deemed offensive by some people and not offensive by others, but the First Amendment protects it.
Gotcha, thank you.
Okay, I
Okay.
think we've got our
We've got some-
charge to, and what we will do is go back, discuss, pull together some more detailed information, and then come back, present that to you, and where we think is the staff that you should consider going, but it's ultimately gonna be your decision.
Well, and also, don't even tell us if it's illegal. I mean, don't even let us go down that path.
We won't.
Just go ahead and nip that conversation. Okay, this is the legal stuff
Right.
there, and then I look forward to our, the other committee members.
Yes.
Because again, this is just what we're coming up with,
Right.
and they have additional insights.
Some of these very well may be short answers from
Yeah.
Right.
our esteemed attorneys at the end of the table, but it's just not worth going there, but, that'll give some time to pull this together and then bring you something just
Okay.
packaged up.
Well, and on another note is understanding what's already there. And again, with our amphitheater, it never happened. If we're trying to nip something from growing, I don't know if there's something that we can do, like
Sure.
future outdoor things, it would be residential, but obviously we can't, it would be for future noises.
Well,
Right, and that one is close to a residential, RS zoned areas.
yeah, I think we owe it to, if we're going to bring something back, for example, that would expand from RS to all residential zones. And given our experience of what's out there, we see other, I wouldn't even call them red flags. It's just things that I would, if I were in your position, I would want me to tell you to tell me that if you do this, here's 3 other places that may be negatively impacted, that you may not feel the same way about as you feel about the one that we're getting
Right.
complaints on. And understand if we change this, they're going to be impacted too. So
Unintended, yes, let us
We'll look
know
at
of
that.
all unintended consequences, as well as illegal ones.
Memo.
Just remember the neighborhood or
All we
the,
can is tell you.
or the, what is it called? What you call it? What is it called? The event space.
The fairground?
But yeah, who was first, the neighborhood or the fairgrounds? I mean, I would be interested in that because I think when someone asked, I'm not sure, it grandfathered in, and I think, I would want to know who was first.
Maybe going way back on both of them. We'll see if we can come up.
Okay, so, yeah, I got you.
You know, I think the fairground, I think Bruce is right. It's probably operated out there since the sixties or seventies. And, yeah, so I would think for the most part, if we have established subdivisions that have been platted out there, they more than likely probably came later.
Yeah, I see.
But that does, there's also, property owners with homes on them that have been there well before the sixties probably too.
Oh,
So
I see, okay.
we'll see what we get.
Well, and the new uses too, like you said, monster truck competition. Yeah, in the sixties, they would not have been as loud of a monster truck show as would we potentially.
There are lots of things that,
Yeah, so if it's sold, if that property, if it's sold and another commercial entity wanted to come in and be a dirt bike trail of some sort, that goes through a whole nother round of, it's not permitted there.
it's just permitted as a fairground right now. If they wanted to establish a permanent use other than a fairground,
That's a whole nother,
that's a whole.
Okay.
that's covered.
Yes,
Motion,
from zoning and use. So, yeah.
sorry, next. Sure. Dave,
Yes.
do we want to look at the next date?
Our next date, yeah, of course, our next date is our next month, and that's, in April, I think it might be April 3rd, because I think our voting meeting is on April 1st.
It is.
Yes, it's a very
Love that.
unusual April with 5 Tuesdays. So
Looks
our
good
next
to me.
meeting will be April 3rd, Thursday, April 3rd. Okay,
Are you available?
It's something.
So we'll at least have a quorum.
yeah. Okay,
If that were left to,
yes,
Well, at least you know what we said.
yeah, motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you.
Guys.
Hey, Courtney, I ran in late because I was dropping that thumb drive off. Yeah, so I was just over there. Yeah.